The ballroom at Fort Campbell looked exactly how the Army likes to remember itself: polished floors, flags lined up with perfect spacing, officers in dress blues standing a little straighter than usual. The division anniversary gala always had that tone. Pride, tradition, a lot of brass and a lot of speeches. My sister Lydia stood near the stage Bronze Star, with V. Device nominee smiling like she'd been waiting her whole life for this exact lighting. The announcer called her name and the room responded the way rooms do when they believe they're watching history. Applause rolled forward in waves. A few whistles from younger lieutenants in the back. My parents were in the front row. My father retired. Major Thomas Cole, chest out, hands already clapping before the announcer finished the sentence. My mother had that tight smile she used when something confirmed a story she'd been telling her friends for months. I stayed near the back of the room, close to one of the tall, round tables no one was using. Not hiding. Just not featured. Lydia stepped up to the microphone. Her dress blues were sharp. Her posture was flawless. She had always been good at presentation. That was her job, public affairs officer. Tell the story. Shape the narrative. Make the Army look steady and strong. She began with gratitude. The division. The men and women who serve. The weight of responsibility. It was clean, practiced, confident. Then she moved into Syria. On that night, she said, steady and measured, when our convoy was hit and our leadership went down, someone had to step forward. The room leaned in. She described the ambush, enemy fire from the tree line, confusion on the net, dust in the air. She talked about organizing movement under pressure, about keeping soldiers focused when it mattered most. She never lied outright. She just placed herself in the center of the story. My father stood before the applause even started. That's his thing, he likes to set the tempo. My mother followed, dabbing at her eyes like she'd just watched a national anthem at a playoff game. Around them, other families stood too. I didn't, Lydia continued. We don't choose the moment, we just respond. There it was. The line that would end up in every local news article by morning. A slideshow lit up behind her deployment photos, a few grainy stills from convoy footage. Nothing classified. Just enough to look real. One image froze on the screen. A dusty road. A silhouette by a vehicle. It wasn't her, but from the angle it could pass. The announcer returned to the microphone and read the citation draft for her Bronze Star with V. The language was formal, careful, heavy, with words like valor and decisive action under fire. It referenced maintaining cohesion during enemy contact and supporting the safe extraction of wounded personnel. Supporting. That word stuck. I remembered the radio call from that night. Cole, you're in charge. Clear, direct, no hesitation. The ballroom filled with applause again. Lydia nodded slightly, like she understood the weight of what she was receiving. She shook hands with the division commander. Cameras flashed. A few soldiers from another brigade started chanting her name as a joke, and she laughed it off gracefully. From where I stood, I could see the edge of my parents' table. My father was already leaning over to the colonel seated next to him. That's my daughter, he said. Not quietly. I caught a few glances from soldiers who knew me. Some nodded. A couple looked confused. No one said anything. The Army doesn't do public contradictions at formal events. The music picked up as the band shifted back into something upbeat. The ceremony portion moved on to other awards. Lydia stepped off stage to a small circle of officers offering congratulations. She looked different up close, less polished, a little tight around the eyes. When she noticed me near the back, she gave a brief nod. Not surprised, not nervous, just acknowledging I existed in the same room. That was enough to confirm something. At our family table later, I took the empty chair at the end. My mother reached for Lydia's hand across the table like she'd just come back from the moon. You carried the division tonight, she said. Lydia gave a modest smile. It was a team effort. My father cut in. No, that kind of leadership is rare. He looked at me briefly. Not accusing, not hostile, just measuring. You always were the steady one, he added. It wasn't clear which daughter he meant. A captain from another battalion leaned toward Lydia. That citation was strong. Promotion board will love it. She thanked him and took a sip of water. Controlled, balanced. No one asked about the full after-action report. No one asked who was listed as acting commander when our platoon leader went down. That part doesn't make it into Gala speeches. The lights dimmed slightly as dinner was served. Silverware clinked against plates. Conversations blended into background noise. I thought about the timeline from that night in Syria. Contact at 2,143. First casualty at 2,146. Radio shift at 2,148. Medevac request logged at 2,152. Extraction complete by 2,206. Facts are quiet. They don't clap. Across the room, Lydia was explaining something animatedly to a pair of majors. Her hands moved as she spoke. She had always known how to hold attention. My mother leaned closer to me. "You must be proud of her." "I'm glad everyone made it home," I answered. That seemed to satisfy her. On the far side of the ballroom, I noticed a cluster of familiar faces near one of the side walls. Soldiers from our unit. A few of the same ones who had been in that convoy. They weren't at a table, just standing together watching. One of them met my eyes briefly and gave a small nod. Not celebratory, not dramatic, just steady. The band transitioned into something slower. Couples moved toward the dance floor. The official program was done. The story of the night had already been decided. Lydia rose again to mingle with more senior officers. The Bronze Star nomination would move forward through channels. OER bullets would be written. Files would be reviewed. My father stood and raised his glass in a casual toast toward her. A few people followed. From the back of the room, the stage lights cast long shadows across the floor. Lydia laughed at something someone said and adjusted the metal ribbon on her chest, making sure it sat straight under the overhead lights. I watched the room. Not the stage. The room. And I stayed exactly where I was. I kept my eyes on the cluster of soldiers near the wall instead of watching Lydia adjust her metal ribbon under the lights. They weren't smiling. That mattered more than the applause. My father was still standing, shaking hands with officers like he'd personally signed the Bronze Star paperwork. He had that look on his face, the one he used at retirement ceremonies when someone mentioned legacy. Legacy was his favorite word. We grew up on it. In our house in Texas, everything came back to service. Framed photos of my grandfather in Korea. My father in desert camo during Desert Storm. Shadow boxes lined the hallway. Metals polished. Ribbons squared. Lydia used to walk past those frames and point at them like they were goals. I used to stop and read the nameplates. She liked the spotlight. I liked the details. At school events, Lydia volunteered to MC assemblies. I ran track and didn't tell anyone when I placed. She spoke confidently about future leadership roles. I filled out ROTC paperwork quietly and mailed it before anyone asked. When she got into a private university with a communications scholarship, my parents threw a party. When I chose Army ROTC at a state school, my father nodded once and said, "Good, practical." Practical was not the same as impressive. Lydia called home every week during college. Stories about campus leadership boards, networking events, professors who said she had presence. My mother repeated those stories at church. When I called, it was usually about field exercises. Long nights, early mornings, blisters and inspections. My father would listen for a minute, then ask if I'd considered branching into something with more upward mobility. Infantry wasn't glamorous. It wasn't media-friendly. It didn't come with photo ops. When I commissioned, Lydia showed up in a tailored dress and introduced me to her friends as the tough one. She made it sound like a personality trait, not a profession. 2 years later, she commissioned as a public affairs officer. My mother cried harder at that ceremony than she had at mine. "She'll tell the Army's story," my mother said proudly. No one asked who would be inside the story. At the gala table, my father finally sat back down and leaned toward Lydia. "This is what we raised you for." She smiled at him the way she always had, confident, assured. I just did my job. That line would have been funny if it weren't being applauded. I reached for my water and took a slow sip. Across the room, one of the sergeants from our unit was still watching the stage. He didn't look impressed. He looked thoughtful. The first time Lydia and I deployed at the same time, my parents treated it like symmetry. 2 daughters both serving. They liked telling that story. What they didn't like was nuance. On deployment, roles matter. A PAO doesn't operate inside the maneuver element. They embed when cleared. They document. They interview. They don't hold sectors. Lydia wanted proximity. She always had. In Syria, she'd requested to move closer to the convoy element for footage. She said it would capture authentic leadership under stress. The battalion commander approved limited access with clear restrictions. Stay with the rear element. Maintain distance during contact. Follow instructions. She agreed. At the gala table, a lieutenant colonel approached and congratulated Lydia again. "You kept it together out there," he said. "That's rare." She nodded modestly. We all stepped up. We. That word did a lot of work. My father glanced at me. "You were there too, right?" "Yes." He waited like there was more I was supposed to add. "That's good," he said when I didn't elaborate. My mother adjusted the centerpiece flowers slightly, like something needed straightening. "You two made us proud." Made. Past tense. The band shifted into a slower song. Couples drifted toward the dance floor. Lydia was pulled into another circle of officers. Her laugh carried over the music. At some point during dinner, one of the majors leaned across the table toward me. "Hell of a deployment," he said quietly. "It was busy," I replied. He studied me for a second, then nodded. "You good with everything?" That was a loaded question. In the Army, it usually means more than it sounds like. "I'm good," I said. He didn't look convinced, but he didn't press. When we were kids, Lydia used to rehearse speeches in front of the bathroom mirror. She'd hold a hairbrush like a microphone and practice pauses. Practice eye contact. Practice sincerity. I used to practice disassembling my grandfather's old toolbox so I could put it back together faster each time. Different skill sets. The first time our father ever said he was proud of my performance was after Ranger School. Not at graduation. Not in front of anyone. Just in the driveway when we got home. "Not many make it," he said. That was it. No party, no speech. Lydia's award tonight had been announced weeks in advance. A group of younger officers approached our table asking Lydia about leadership under fire. She answered smoothly, keeping her phrasing careful. Emphasizing teamwork. Emphasizing decisiveness. She didn't mention the radio call when the platoon leader went down. She didn't mention who acknowledged it. She didn't mention who repositioned the gun truck. Selective detail isn't technically lying. It's just editing. Across the ballroom, the cluster of 12 soldiers near the wall hadn't moved much. A few of them were talking quietly now. One glanced toward the stage, then toward me again. I recognized every face. Dusty road. Night vision. Radio chatter. Facts don't fade the way applause does. My father stood again as another officer approached to congratulate Lydia. He introduced her like she'd just been confirmed for something bigger than a medal. "My daughter," he said proudly. She stepped up when it counted. The officer nodded approvingly. No one asked who gave the order to shift formation. No one asked who called in the 9 line. No one asked who stayed on the gun until the bird was wheels up. The band stopped between songs, and for a brief second the ballroom fell quiet. In that gap, I heard boots move against the floor from across the room. Not random movement, deliberate. I looked toward the wall again. The 12 weren't just watching anymore. The sound of boots shifting on the ballroom floor blended into something else in my head, the crack of incoming rounds snapping past a windshield. Eastern Syria doesn't give you dramatic warnings. It just changes tone. 1 second, it's engine noise and routine chatter on the net. The next, it's contact. We were moving in a 3-vehicle element just after 2100. Routine partner force coordination. Nothing high profile. Lydia had been riding in the rear vehicle with the battalion PANCO. She'd pushed to be closer to the maneuver element earlier in the week. The battalion commander approved limited proximity. Not inside the stack. Not forward during breach. Observe, don't participate. That was the agreement. At 2143, the first round hit the hood of the lead vehicle. You don't hear the first shot the way movies make it sound. You feel it. The vibration through metal. The sudden change in the driver's breathing. Then the radio fills with clipped words. Contact left. The platoon leader's voice came across the net, steady but tight. Then a second burst hit heavier. The lead vehicle swerved. Someone yelled that the lieutenant was down. I was in the second truck. The moment leadership goes down, the air shifts. Everyone is waiting half a second too long for someone else to speak. Cole, you're in charge. That was over the net. Clear. No drama. Just transfer of authority. I answered without thinking. Copy. Shift right. Gun truck suppress left tree line. The rear vehicle hesitated. They were taking rounds, too. Dust was kicking up from the roadside. It wasn't a coordinated ambush with explosives and blocking positions. It was opportunistic small arms fire from elevation. Enough to pin you if you freeze. We don't freeze. I ordered the lead driver to hold position behind partial cover. Told the rear vehicle to widen spacing. We needed angles. We needed visibility. The machine gun in my truck was already up. I leaned out just enough to confirm sector. Tracers cut through the air above us. Over the radio, someone reported the platoon leader had taken a round high in the shoulder. Still conscious, but bleeding. Medic to lead vehicle, I said. Rear element maintain suppression. Then I heard something that didn't belong on the net. Lydia's voice, high, fast, asking where to move, asking if she should get out. She wasn't supposed to be on that channel. I keyed up again. Rear vehicle maintain position. Do not dismount. Silence for half a second. Then copy. The gun truck shifted fire left as I directed. Short bursts, controlled. We weren't trying to win a firefight. We were trying to buy time. I called up the 9 line for medevac once the medic confirmed the lieutenant needed extraction. Grid coordinates, number of patients, no dramatics, just facts. Rounds kept coming sporadically from the tree line. Not disciplined fire, not professional, but enough to keep heads down. Rear element status, I asked. There was a pause. Then the PANCO responded, we've got one unaccounted for. I didn't have to ask who. I scanned right and caught movement behind the third vehicle. Lydia had stepped out, camera still slung across her chest. She was crouched, but not behind hard cover. She was looking toward the lead truck like proximity alone would create footage worth keeping. Get back in the vehicle, I ordered over the net. No response. Another burst snapped through the air and hit dirt near her boots. She flinched, finally registering what was happening. I didn't have the luxury of irritation. I moved. I crossed the gap between vehicles low and fast, grabbed her vest, and pulled her behind the engine block of the rear truck. She was shaking, eyes wide. No injury, just shock. Stay here, I told her. Direct, no softness. Do not move unless you're told. She nodded too quickly. I left her there and went back to my sector. The medic called that the lieutenant was stabilized enough for movement. The bird was inbound. We had minutes. I coordinated staggered movement back toward a more defensible position for extraction. Gun truck last. We'd fall back by element. The rear vehicle hesitated again when rounds intensified. I took the mic. Shift fire right. Move now. They moved. The helicopter blades were audible before visible. That low thump cutting through everything else. As the bird came in, I directed the lead element to push first. Wounded loaded. Second vehicle next. I stayed until the gun truck repositioned. Last to break contact. Standard. A burst hit the side panel near me. Shrapnel from ricochet caught my lower back. It felt like someone had slammed into me with a metal bar. No dramatic collapse. Just heat and pressure. I stayed on the gun. Once the final vehicle cleared and the bird lifted, the firing tapered off. Whoever was out there didn't pursue. Inside the helicopter, the medic pressed into my back and asked if I could feel my legs. Yes, that was the only answer that mattered. Across from me, Lydia sat strapped and pale silent. Her camera lay cracked at her feet. No one congratulated anyone. No speeches, just breathing, counting heads. Back at the forward operating base, the timeline was logged. Initial contact. Transfer of command. Medevac request. Extraction complete. Clean. No hero language. No dramatic phrasing. Just the record. Weeks later, in a ballroom full of polished medals and practiced applause, that record sounded different. In Lydia's version, she had helped maintain control when leadership faltered. In reality, she had almost stepped into open fire because she thought the shot mattered more than the sector. Facts don't resent being edited. They just wait. The first thing I remember clearly after the helicopter was the sound of a monitor beeping somewhere to my left. Not dramatic, not cinematic, just steady and annoying. Landstuhl Regional Medical Center. Has that same smell no matter how many times you pass through it, antiseptic and over-filtered air. when I tried to shift pain shot through my lower back and reminded me why I was there. A nurse noticed I was awake and asked a few orientation questions. Name, unit, location. I answered them without hesitation. How long, I asked. Almost 2 weeks, she said. 2 weeks is enough time for a story to form. My phone wasn't with me at first. That was standard. When I finally got access to it, notifications stacked up faster than I could scroll. Messages from soldiers in the unit, a few from officers, a handful from numbers I didn't recognize, and several links from my mother. I opened one of the articles. The headline read, Army officer recognized for leadership under fire in Syria. The photo was Lydia in uniform. The article quoted her describing maintaining composure when the convoy's command element was compromised. It referenced how she supported coordinated movement during active enemy contact. It mentioned her pending Bronze Star with V device nomination. My name appeared once, as part of the element. That was it. I closed the article and opened the draft citation that had been forwarded through official channels. The language was formal, careful. It described actions taken in the absence of immediate command authority. It credited her with helping stabilize the situation under direct enemy fire. It didn't say she took command. It didn't say she called the 9 line. It didn't say she stayed on the gun. But it placed her close enough to those actions that anyone reading it would assume. The tactical after-action report, the classified one, was accurate. I verified that through my chain of command once I was cleared to access it. That mattered. What didn't match was the public affairs summary and the narrative attached to the award packet. Those documents aren't classified. They're meant for broad release. They're the version families read, and that version leaned heavily in one direction. My mother called before I could process the difference. We're so proud of her, she said immediately. The coverage is everywhere. I replied. You must be proud too. I'm glad everyone made it home. She paused like she was waiting for a different answer. Your father says this is what legacy looks like. Legacy again. A few days later, Lydia walked into my hospital room in Germany. Perfect uniform. Controlled expression. You look better, she said. I'm vertical. That helps. She pulled up a chair and crossed one leg over the other. There's been a lot of attention. The battalion pushed a summary before you were conscious. Things move fast. I didn't respond. She continued. The commander needed someone to speak to the press. I was there. You were, I said. She leaned forward slightly. It wasn't about taking anything from you. It was about clarity. The narrative had to be cohesive. Cohesive. That citation draft, I said, places you at the center. It places me in a leadership role during chaos, she replied, which isn't inaccurate. The monitor behind me kept beeping at its steady pace. Did you write the narrative summary, I asked? Yes, she said evenly. That's my job. There it was. Public affairs officers draft summaries. They shape language. They frame events. That part wasn't unusual. What was unusual was how the framing shifted weight. Perception shapes careers, she added. You know that. I did. OEER bullets. Promotion boards. Command recommendations. The Army runs on documented performance. I studied her for a second. No panic, no visible guilt, just confidence. You're up for primary zone major next year, she said. This doesn't hurt you. Doesn't hurt you. Not the same as helps. Later that afternoon, a major from battalion stopped by my room. He asked how I was feeling and whether I needed anything. Is the award packet final, I asked. It's in review, he said carefully. Nothing is approved yet. Who reviewed the narrative summary? PA drafted it. Commander signed off. That made sense procedurally. No conspiracy. No backroom forgery. Just language that shifted emphasis. When Lydia left Germany a few days later, she flew back to the States to attend a local ceremony recognizing deployed soldiers. She stood on a small stage in our hometown while I was still learning how to sit up without assistance. The photos made their way online. My father shared every one. Leadership under fire, he captioned one of them. When I was discharged and cleared for limited duty, I returned to Fort Campbell with a profile and physical therapy schedule. The unit treated me the way units do when someone's been injured, direct, respectful, not sentimental. A few of the soldiers who had been in the convoy stopped by my office individually. They didn't mention the articles. They didn't mention the citation. They asked about my back. That told me what I needed to know. Weeks passed. The Bronze Star nomination advanced through brigade channels. Nothing is automatic at that level. It requires review signatures validation. The narrative summary continued to circulate. At a battalion meeting, someone referenced Lydia's leadership moment in a broader discussion about resilience. No one corrected it, not because they didn't know, because it wasn't their place. I attended one of the internal briefings, reviewing deployment actions for lessons learned. The timeline slide displayed the radio call transferring command. My name was there, clean, accurate. The difference between that slide and the Gala speech wasn't in the facts. It was in the spotlight. One afternoon, I opened the shared drive and pulled up both documents side by side, the classified AAR and the public narrative summary. The AAR listed sequence of command clearly. The summary listed impressions. Impressions travel faster. I closed both files and leaned back in my chair. Physical therapy had helped. The pain was manageable. The language wasn't. I didn't need applause. But I wasn't going to pretend the record didn't matter. I flew home to Texas the week after Brigade confirmed the Bronze Star packet had cleared another level of review. The ranch looked the same as it always had, wide fence lines, dry grass, shifting in the wind, the old barn leaning slightly to the left like it had since we were kids. The place carried weight in our family. My grandfather built it after he retired. My father treated it like proof that service led to something solid, legacy with acreage. My parents had asked me to come by to talk. That phrase usually meant something had already been decided. Inside the house, the hallway still held the same framed photos Korea Desert Storm commissioning ceremonies. Lydia's recent ceremony photo had already been added near the front. Mine wasn't. We sat at the dining room table. My father at the head, my mother to his right. Lydia across from me. She wore civilian clothes this time, but she still carried herself like she was stepping into a briefing. My father cleared his throat. We wanted to discuss the trust. The trust had been created when my grandfather passed. It covered the ranch and an investment account worth a little over $1 million. The document was straightforward, but left one clause open to interpretation. The assets would go to the child who best upholds and advances the family's military legacy as determined by the trustees. My parents were co-trustees. My father slid a folder across the table. We've made a determination. I didn't open it immediately. My mother spoke softly. Based on recent events and recognition. I opened the folder. The trustee decision named Lydia as primary beneficiary of the ranch and controlling interest in the trust assets. The justification cited demonstrated leadership under direct enemy engagement and public recognition of valor consistent with the family's service history. Public recognition, not operational record. My father leaned back. This isn't personal. It's about continuity. I let that sit for a second. You made this decision before the award is finalized, I said. The nomination speaks for itself, he replied. The nomination, not the signed order, not the final approval. The nomination. Lydia folded her hands neatly on the table. It wasn't something I pushed for. The folder in front of me included another document, a waiver of contest. If I signed it, I would formally acknowledge the trustee determination and agree not to challenge it later. We'd prefer to avoid disputes, my mother said. Families don't need that kind of strain. I thought about the AAR sitting in a secure system back at Fort Campbell. Clear, unambiguous. I thought about the narrative summary circulating publicly. Different documents, different audiences. You based this on media coverage, I said evenly. We based it on what the Army released, my father corrected. There it was, trusting the press summary over the operational report. Legacy isn't just about who was there, he continued. It's about who represents it. Represents. I looked at Lydia. She didn't look smug. She looked composed, almost cautious. You don't think this affects Brianna's service, my mother added quickly. You both served. That's what matters. Equal participation. Unequal credit. If the investigation adjusts anything, my father said, we can revisit. Investigation. He said it casually, like it was unlikely. The Army doesn't open formal administrative investigations lightly. Not over narrative framing. Not unless someone requests it. I closed the folder. You're within your authority as trustees, I said. My father nodded, relieved by the tone. But authority doesn't guarantee accuracy. He frowned slightly. Are you accusing us of acting in bad faith? No, because they weren't. They believed the version they had been given. That didn't make it right. The waiver sat between us. Signing this avoids legal fees, my mother said gently. and unnecessary division. Division. The army and the family both use that word. I picked up the pen. Lydia shifted in her chair. Brianna. She said, her voice lower now, less public. This doesn't diminish what you did. Diminish, I signed. The ink dried quickly. My father exhaled like a logistical problem had just been resolved. Thank you, he said. He reached for his glass of iced tea and took a long sip. Outside wind moved across the field behind the house. The same field where we'd run drills as kids pretending fence posts were obstacles, and the barn was a forward operating base. After dinner, Lydia stepped outside onto the porch. I followed. The sun was dropping behind the tree line. You didn't have to sign, she said. I know. She leaned against the railing. This isn't about stealing anything. It's about framing. She looked at me carefully. The army moves fast. Narratives form. Someone fills the gap. And you did. Yes. No hesitation. For what it's worth, she added. I didn't change the tactical report. I know. She studied my face. Then what's the issue? The issue, that the summary doesn't match the sequence of command. She shrugged slightly. It matches impact. Impact. That award packet helps both of us, she continued. It shows our family produces leaders. Our family. Not the unit. Not the platoon. The family. I didn't correct you at the gala, I said. You didn't. I won't correct you here either. Her expression shifted. Not fear, not guilt. Just calculation. You're not planning to escalate this, she said carefully. I'm planning to align the record. She didn't respond. Inside, my parents were already discussing future renovations to the ranch house. Future plans under the assumption of a finalized narrative. The army runs on documentation. Trusts run on documentation too. As I walked back toward my car, the Texas air felt dry and steady. The waiver copy sat in my bag. I hadn't argued. I hadn't protested. I had signed exactly what they put in front of me. And then I drove back to Fort Campbell with the same clarity I had on that road in Syria. When leadership drops, someone has to step forward. I pulled into the battalion parking lot just before 0600 and stayed in the driver's seat a minute longer than necessary. The sun wasn't fully up yet. The building lights were still on. Routine morning PT formations were forming in the distance. Nothing about the post looked unstable. That helped. I wasn't interested in a dramatic confrontation. I was interested in documentation. Inside my office, I closed the door, opened my laptop, and pulled up the deployment roster from that night. 3 vehicles. 15 personnel total. 12 were still assigned to the division. 3 had PCS'd. I started with the first name on the list. Staff Sergeant Ramirez answered on the second ring. You good? He asked immediately. I'm vertical, I said. I need to confirm something. He didn't hesitate. That night? Yes. You ran it. No emotion. No buildup. Would you put that in a written statement, I asked. Yes. I moved down the list. Sergeant Holloway answered next. He paused when I asked the question. You sure you want to open this? He asked quietly. I want the record accurate. He exhaled. Then yeah, I'll write it. Not everyone answered right away. A few called back later that day. One texted first and asked if this was about the Bronze Star. It's about sequence of command, I replied. That phrasing mattered. By lunchtime, I had 6 verbal confirmations and 3 written statements in my inbox. Short, direct, no dramatics. She assumed command at 2148. She issued movement orders. She remained on the gun position during extraction. Facts. I drove to meet Sergeant First Class Delaney at a small off-post coffee shop that afternoon. He had been in the gun truck with me. He slid into the booth across from me and placed a flash drive on the table. I kept a copy of the unedited helmet cam, he said. Didn't sit right deleting it. I nodded. Are we burning careers here, he asked. Only if someone falsified something, I replied. He leaned back. You planning to go public? I'm planning to go procedural. He gave a small half smile. That's worse. Back on post, I scheduled a meeting with the brigade legal office. Jag didn't look surprised when I outlined the issue. You're not alleging tampering with the classified AAR? The captain asked. No, just narrative framing in the public summary and award citation draft. Yes. He nodded slowly. Then this falls under administrative review. AR 15-6 is appropriate. Formal investigation. Not a spectacle, not a courtroom. Paperwork. Before submitting anything, I notified my chain of command. Transparency mattered. Lieutenant Colonel Donovan listened without interrupting as I laid out the timeline. You're aware this affects both of you, he said. Yes, promotion boards are coming up. I know. He studied me for a moment. This isn't about the ranch. He had done his homework. No, I said. It's about the record. He leaned back in his chair. If you submit this, it will be formal. There will be interviews, statements, command scrutiny. That's the point. He didn't smile. But he didn't discourage it either. By the end of the week, I had 12 written statements. Different writing styles. Different lengths. Same sequence of events. One corporal wrote only 3 sentences. She took over. She told us where to move. She stayed last. That was enough. I compiled the documents, attached the radio transcript excerpts, and referenced the AAR page numbers without quoting classified content directly. The goal wasn't to leak. It was to align. Before filing the formal request, I sent Lydia a brief message. I'm initiating administrative review of the narrative summary and citation draft. She responded within minutes. This is unnecessary. It's procedural. You're escalating this. I'm documenting it. There was a pause before her next message. This will follow both of us. That was true. The Army doesn't separate siblings in paperwork. It lists names, ranks, actions. The AR-15-6 request went up that afternoon. Within days, I was notified that an investigating officer had been appointed. Interviews would begin the following week. Word travels fast in a brigade. By the time PT formation ended Friday morning, at least 3 officers had asked me if everything was good. That word again. Lydia requested a meeting. We met in a neutral conference room on post. No raised voices, no accusations. You didn't talk to me before filing, she said. I did, I replied. In Germany. That wasn't formal. It is now. She folded her arms. You're making this bigger than it needs to be. It already is. She leaned forward slightly. You think the board won't notice this? You think they'll separate your name from mine? I'm not submitting this to a board. She watched me carefully. You're forcing command to take a side. No, I'm forcing command to review documentation. Silence stretched between us. I didn't alter the tactical report, she said again. I know. Then what do you want? Accuracy. She exhaled sharply. You're willing to risk everything for wording. For sequence. She stood first. You've always been rigid. I didn't answer. Back in my office, an email from the investigating officer waited in my inbox. Interview schedule attached. 12 names listed. Not everyone in the unit was thrilled about it. Administrative investigations disrupt routines. They pull people into statements, timelines, and uncomfortable conversations. But by Monday morning, the first 2 soldiers had already sat down with the investigating officer. Their statements didn't change. Sequence of command, timestamps, actions taken. No embellishment. The Army doesn't reward the loudest story. It rewards what it can verify. The first interview block started at 8:00 on a Tuesday, and by 7:55, the hallway outside the investigating officer's temporary office was already too quiet. Administrative investigations don't come with drama. They come with clipboards. Major Ellison had been appointed as the investigating officer. Infantry background. No connection to either of us beyond division assignment. That was intentional. He called me in first. Captain Cole, he began, voice neutral recorder on the table. You understand this is a fact-finding process. Yes, sir. You are alleging that the public narrative summary and Bronze Star citation draft do not accurately reflect the sequence of command during enemy contact on May 12, 2019. Yes, sir. He nodded once. Walk me through 2143 to 2206. I did. No adjectives. No emotional weight. Grid movement. Transfer of authority. 9-line submission. Gun truck positioning. Extraction order. Wounded loaded. He asked precise questions. Who confirmed the platoon leader was down? What time did the medevac bird respond on net? Who acknowledged shift in command? Did any radio log indicate Lydia assumed command? No, sir. He flipped through pages. Did she issue any orders over the net? No, sir. He made a note. Did she disobey a direct order? She dismounted against guidance, I said. I directed her back to cover. Was that recorded? Radio log confirms rear element dismount confusion. Helmet cam corroborates movement. He paused at that. You're aware this review may impact both officers' evaluation reports. Yes, sir. And potentially promotion consideration. Yes, sir. He leaned back slightly. Why pursue it? Because the record should match the sequence. He studied my face for a second. probably looking for something personal. Revenge, anger, family conflict. He didn't find it. Over the next week, he interviewed all 12 soldiers. No two statements were identical. That's how you know they're real. Ramirez described the radio call clearly. Holloway focused on movement. Delaney detailed the gun sector shift. The medic referenced stabilization timing. The PANCO admitted confusion over Lydia's movement during contact. None of them exaggerated. None of them dramatized. They just aligned. Meanwhile, word had spread beyond battalion. I got called into Brigade S2 for a routine clearance review. Not punitive, just standard when an officer is involved in an administrative investigation tied to operational reporting. Anything classified mishandled, the captain asked. No. Any personal disputes influencing reporting? No. Any outside pressure? No. He typed steadily. Clearance wasn't suspended, but it was flagged pending investigation outcome. That was the cost. Lydia's interviews were scheduled later in the week. I didn't ask how they went. I didn't need to. At PT formation. Friday morning, a couple of lieutenants stopped talking when I walked past. One nodded respectfully. The other looked uncomfortable. Scandal travels faster than facts. My OER draft for the year was already in progress. The senior rater hadn't finalized language yet. Promotion board packets would lock in a few months. Timing wasn't ideal. Lydia sent one more message late Friday night. You've turned this into something bigger than the incident. I didn't respond, because it wasn't bigger than the incident. It was exactly the incident. On Monday, Lieutenant Colonel Donovan called me into his office. Major Ellison's preliminary findings are consistent, he said. Sir, he's recommending citation draft revision and further review of the award packet. That meant suspension. Not revocation, not yet. Suspension pending validation. The gala is still scheduled, Donovan added. Division anniversary events are planned months out. Canceling one because of a pending administrative review would cause more attention than letting it proceed. She's still the keynote, I asked. For now. He leaned forward slightly. You understand what this looks like from outside? Yes, sir. It looks like two sisters fighting over recognition. Yes, sir. And it may continue to look that way until paperwork closes. I understand. He nodded slowly. You've kept this procedural. That matters. Outside his office, I passed Lydia in the hallway. She stopped. This doesn't end with the corrected paragraph, she said quietly. It ends with alignment. She shook her head. You're naive if you think command won't remember this. They'll remember the documentation. She held my gaze for a long moment. You could have let this go, she said. I could have. She walked away without another word. Later that afternoon, I received a copy of Major Ellison's interim summary. It outlined inconsistencies between the public narrative summary and the verified sequence of command. It did not accuse Lydia of falsifying classified material. It did state that the Bronze Star citation draft overstated her operational role. The recommendation suspend award processing pending final determination. That document would move upward. It would also move outward. Brigade staff officers talk. So do division planners. Even without public release, rumors begin to circulate. At home that night, my phone lit up with a call from my father. Is there something we should know? He asked. There's an administrative review underway, I said. For what? Narrative alignment. He exhaled sharply. You're jeopardizing this over wording. I'm aligning documentation. You signed the waiver. Yes, that was supposed to settle this. That settled the trust decision based on available information. Silence. You're creating instability, he said finally. Paperwork creates stability, I replied. He didn't like that. The next morning, Brigade announced that the Bronze Star nomination associated with 12th May 2019 was under review. No names, just date. But anyone paying attention knew. The Division Gala date remained unchanged. Guest lists finalized. Programs printed. Keynote speaker confirmed. By the end of the week, 12 soldiers had already given recorded testimony under oath. That part wasn't rumor. That part was documented. And documentation has a way of showing up exactly where it's needed. The ballroom looked almost identical to the last time, except this time the air felt heavier. Programs were laid out neatly at every table. Lydia's name was printed under keynote address. No asterisk. No mention of review. The Bronze Star nomination was technically suspended, but until paperwork fully processed, nothing public changed. The band warmed up near the stage. Officers adjusted ribbons. Families found their seats. I took a chair near the back again, not hiding, just observing. The 12 soldiers who had been interviewed during the AR-15-6 were seated at separate tables this time, not clustered together. Spread out. Intentional or coincidence, I didn't ask. Lieutenant Colonel Donovan stood near the side of the stage speaking quietly with a member of division staff. His posture was calm, unreadable. Lydia moved through the crowd with the same practiced composure she'd shown months earlier. If she was unsettled, she hid it well. Her dress blues were precise, her shoulders squared. When the master of ceremonies called her name, the applause was polite, not thunderous. Word had circulated enough to temper enthusiasm. She stepped up to the podium. "Good evening," she began. Her voice carried evenly across the room. She spoke about resilience, about cohesion under fire, about the responsibility of leadership when chaos hits without warning. Then she reached the part of the story that had traveled the furthest. On May 12th, she said when our convoy took fire and command structure was disrupted, we had seconds to respond. She described confusion on the net. She described stepping into a leadership role to maintain momentum. It was careful language, less absolute than before. No direct claims of issuing orders, just implication. At a table near the center of the room, Sergeant Ramirez set his glass down deliberately. Donovan stepped forward from the side of the stage before Lydia could continue. "Ma'am," he said respectfully, but firmly addressing the MC rather than Lydia. "We need a brief administrative clarification." The room shifted. Not panic, not noise, just attention. The MC hesitated, then nodded and stepped aside. Donovan took the microphone. "This division holds itself to a standard of documented accuracy," he began. "An AR-15-6 administrative investigation regarding the 12th of May. 2019 convoy engagement has produced findings relevant to tonight's remarks." The room went still. Lydia remained at the podium, expression steady. Donovan continued. "This is not a disciplinary announcement. It is a correction of sequence." He gestured toward the screen behind the stage. A slide appeared. Timeline format. Timestamps. No dramatic imagery. Just black text on white background. 2143, initial contact. 2146, platoon leader wounded. 2148, transfer of command acknowledged over radio, Captain Brianna Cole. 2152, medevac request transmitted by Captain Cole. 2206, extraction complete. Donovan stepped aside slightly. At this time, he said personnel present during the engagement have requested to clarify the record. He didn't call names. He didn't cue them. He didn't need to. From 3 different tables, soldiers stood. Ramirez first. "She took command at 2148, he said clearly. "I heard it over the net." Holloway stood next. "She issued movement orders to the rear element." Delaney rose from near the back. "She stayed on the gun position until we cleared." Each statement was short, controlled. No emotion layered on top. The medic stood forth. "She coordinated my access to the wounded lieutenant and called the 9 line. Across the room, heads turned slowly toward Lydia. She didn't interrupt. 2 more soldiers stood from opposite sides of the ballroom. "She pulled me behind cover." She directed staggered movement during suppression. The statements weren't rehearsed. They weren't identical. They matched the investigation summary displayed on the screen. Donovan returned to the microphone. The investigation determined that while First Lieutenant Lydia Cole was present during the engagement, the verified sequence of command placed Captain Brianna Cole in operational control following initial casualty. He paused long enough for the words to land. "The Bronze Star citation draft associated with this engagement has been suspended pending formal revision." No applause, no gasps, just silence. Lydia's hand tightened slightly around the podium edge. Not shaking, just controlled. Donovan finished evenly. "We honor service best when we honor accuracy." He stepped away. The MC hesitated again, then quietly announced a brief intermission. Chairs shifted. Conversation started in low tones. My parents were seated near the front. My father stared straight ahead. My mother's face had gone pale, but she held her posture. No one approached me immediately. Lydia stepped down from the podium without assistance. She didn't look at me as she passed. A captain from another brigade muttered something about paperwork politics under his breath. Ramirez sat back down calmly. No one cheered. No one celebrated. The slideshow remained frozen on the timeline slide. Eventually, division staff cleared the screen and resumed the program. Another award presentation followed, subdued but orderly. The Army doesn't collapse over corrections. It absorbs them. When the formal portion concluded, Donovan walked past my table. "Record aligned," he said quietly. "Yes, sir." He gave a single nod and moved on. Across the ballroom, Lydia was speaking with the colonel in low tones. No visible argument, just conversation. The program had shifted, but it hadn't imploded. That mattered. The 12 soldiers didn't cluster together afterward. They dispersed naturally, as if nothing unusual had happened. Because in their view, nothing unusual had. They had simply stated what occurred. I remained near the back of the room as families filtered toward the exits. The stage lights dimmed slightly, casting long shadows across the polished floor. No medal had been physically removed that night. No one had been escorted out. But the narrative had changed. And in the Army, that is what determines everything else. The morning after the gala, the post felt normal in the way only the Army can manage after something publicly uncomfortable. PT formations ran on time. Motors pool reports were filed. Staff meetings started at exactly 900. But inside brigade headquarters, paperwork was already moving. By 1000, an official memorandum went out, the Bronze Star nomination associated with the 12th of May. 2019, engagement was formally withdrawn pending final review. That language mattered. Withdrawn. Not delayed. Not adjusted. Withdrawn. Lydia's name wasn't in the memo. Neither was mine. The Army prefers dates over people. I received a separate email from Major Ellison later that afternoon. Final AR-15-6 findings attached. The summary was precise. Verified transfer of command to Captain Brianna Cole at 2148. Confirmed issuance of movement orders and medevac request by Captain Cole. Determined that the public affairs narrative summary overstated the operational role of First Lieutenant Lydia Cole. Recommended administrative counseling for mischaracterization in citation draft. Recommended correction of official narrative summaries moving forward. No criminal language. No accusation of falsifying classified material. Administrative. Measured. Accurate. The most important line sat near the bottom. The record should reflect operational control assumed by Captain Brianna Cole during the engagement. I forwarded the memo to my raider and senior raider. By the end of the week, my OER draft had been revised to include explicit reference to assuming command under fire and coordinating casualty evacuation. That language would be seen by the promotion board. Lydia's OER, from what I was told through quiet channels, was amended as well. The bullet referencing leadership under direct enemy fire was replaced with presence during engagement in support capacity. Subtle change, significant impact. At brigade, reactions were mixed. Some officers avoided eye contact. Administrative reviews make people nervous. They imagine their own reports being scrutinized. Others treated me the same as before. No fanfare. No congratulations. That was how I preferred it. One afternoon, I passed Lydia in the hallway outside S1. She stopped. "They're issuing me a general officer memorandum of reprimand," she said evenly. I nodded. Administrative, yes. Filed locally. Not career-ending, but permanent enough to slow momentum. They're saying I exercised poor judgment in narrative framing. That's consistent with findings. She held my gaze. "You realize none of this restores what you think you lost." "I didn't lose anything," I replied. "That's not how it looks." Perception again. "I didn't pursue this for perception." She gave a short breath that might have been a laugh. "You always say that." Her promotion timeline shifted automatically once the reprimand was entered. Nothing dramatic, just slower. That's how consequences work in the Army. They rarely explode. They adjust trajectories. At home in Texas, the trust issue resurfaced quickly. My father called 3 days after the official award withdrawal. "We need to revisit the trustee determination," he said. "Based on updated documentation," I replied. He didn't like that phrasing. "The clause requires good faith," he said. "We made our decision based on information available at the time." Understood. But the narrative has changed. The record has aligned. Silence stretched across the line. "The attorney says we can amend the trustee designation if circumstances materially change," he continued. "Have they?" He exhaled slowly. "The basis for recognition did." That was enough. 2 weeks later, the trust was formally amended. No dramatic meeting. No shouting. just signatures and notarization. The ranch reverted to co-beneficiary status, pending future determination. It wasn't a victory parade. It was a correction. My mother called separately. "This has hurt your sister," she said quietly. "She hurt herself," I replied. "That's harsh." "It's accurate." She didn't argue. Back at division, the final Bronze Star approval list was published for that deployment cycle. Lydia's name wasn't on it. Mine wasn't either, and that was fine. The investigation had never recommended transferring the award to me. It had recommended correcting the narrative. Awards follow recommendations. Recommendations follow command discretion. What mattered was that my official record now reflected operational command. Promotion boards don't read press releases. They read OERs and verified actions. By the time board packets locked in my file included a clear bullet referencing assumption of command under enemy contact and coordination of casualty evacuation. No theatrics, just language that matched reality. A few weeks later, Lieutenant Colonel Donovan stopped me in the hallway. "Board feedback is positive," he said quietly. "Yes, sir." "You handled this within channels." "Yes, sir." "That matters more than people realize." I nodded. Lydia transferred to another assignment at the end of the quarter. Not punitive, just reassignment. Public affairs positions rotate often. We didn't have a dramatic final conversation. We crossed paths once more in the parking lot before she left. "This could have stayed internal," she said. It did. She looked at me for a long second, as if searching for something she could still use to reframe it. "You've always believed documentation wins," she said. "It does." She got into her car and drove off without another word. The division moved on. New deployments, new briefings, new award packets. Paperwork closes. Files update. Systems reset. My promotion board results were released in the spring, selected for major. No announcement tied it to Syria. No mention of the investigation. Just a list of names in alphabetical order. That was enough. The promotion list came out on a Tuesday afternoon, buried in an email attachment like every other Army milestone. No fanfare. No music. Just a PDF. My name sat in the middle column under Infantry, Primary Zone, selected for Major. I read it once, closed the file, and went back to work. There's a strange quiet that follows administrative storms. No one brings it up anymore. No one jokes about it. It becomes a line in your file, and then the machine keeps moving. A week later, I stood in a small conference room at battalion headquarters while my rank was officially pinned. 2 colonels, a handful of officers, no cameras. Lydia wasn't there. My parents weren't either. That felt appropriate. After the ceremony, Lieutenant Colonel Donovan pulled me aside. "You understand why this matters," he said. "Yes, sir. You corrected the record without burning the unit. That was the goal." He gave a small nod. "The Army doesn't need perfect people. It needs accurate ones." Accurate. That word had carried everything. The ranch paperwork finished processing not long after my promotion. The trust attorney sent updated documents confirming co-beneficiary status had reverted fully to me based on the original clause and revised interpretation of advancing the family's military legacy. Legal language. Clean. Final. My father called the evening the documents cleared. "We've signed everything," he said. I received the copies. There was a pause. "You didn't have to take it back," he added. "I didn't take it," I replied. "It reverted." He didn't argue with that. "We misjudged," he said eventually. "Yes, no anger in it. Just fact." My mother tried a different angle when she called a few days later. "You could include your sister in the ranch plans," she suggested gently. "You know she's struggling." "I'm not excluding her," I said. "She's not a trustee." "That sounds cold." "It's structured." Silence. "You've changed," she said. "No," I replied. I stopped explaining. That ended the conversation. I didn't sell the ranch. I didn't move back to Texas either. I leased the land to a neighboring family who had run cattle there for years. Stable income, minimal involvement, structure over symbolism. On post, my responsibilities expanded with the new rank. Company command loomed in the near future. Training schedules filled my calendar. One afternoon during a field exercise, a young lieutenant approached me after a live fire lane. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "is it true you requested an AR-15-6 on your own award situation?" "On the narrative," I corrected. He nodded. "Why?" "Because documentation matters." He considered that for a moment. "Did it cost you?" "Yes." "Was it worth it?" "Yes." He didn't ask anything else. That was enough. Lydia and I spoke only once more months later, when she called about updating beneficiary designations for certain family assets. The conversation lasted 4 minutes. No hard feelings, she asked near the end. No illusions, I replied. She gave a short breath that might have been frustration or acceptance. Hard to tell. Do you think it would have played out differently if we weren't related? She asked. No, I said. The paperwork would have caught up. That was the truth. The Veteran Legal and Career Resource Center idea didn't come from a dramatic moment. It came from noticing how many soldiers struggled quietly with administrative systems after service medical boards discharged paperwork appeals. Documentation had saved my record. It could help others, too. I partnered with 2 former JAG officers and a retired sergeant major. We rented a small office off post. No banners. No big launch event. We focused on helping veterans navigate paperwork correctly the first time. Disability claims. Record corrections. Administrative appeals. No press releases. No hero speeches. Just forms filled out accurately and submitted on time. The first time a former specialist walked out with his discharge status corrected after months of frustration, he shook my hand like I'd done something extraordinary. I hadn't. We just followed procedure. That's what had always worked. A year after the gala, I drove past the division headquarters building where it had all unfolded. The banners were different. New speakers, new faces. No one remembered the timeline slide anymore. That's how institutions function. They adjust and move forward. At the ranch, the fence lines held. The land didn't care who owned it. My parents stopped bringing up legacy. They started asking practical questions instead. Weather, cattle lease terms, holiday plans. Lydia built her career elsewhere. Slower, more measured. No more headline moments. We weren't estranged. We weren't close either. We were structured. One evening after a long training day, I sat alone in my office reviewing a young sergeant's packet for a commendation medal. The draft citation used broad language instrumental leadership, decisive action. I crossed out 2 adjectives and replaced them with timestamps and specific actions. Precision matters. I saved the document and leaned back in my chair. No one had handed me justice. No one had delivered closure. What happened was simpler than that. The record matched the reality. My rank reflected the work. The trust reflected the clause. The unit reflected the sequence. That's all I ever wanted. Not applause, not revenge, just alignment. And once the paperwork aligns, everything else settles into place. I didn't win a war against my sister. I didn't destroy her career. I didn't stand on a stage and demand applause. What I did was protect the record. And in the military, that matters more than emotion ever will. Family drama can blur lines faster than combat sometimes. Titles, headlines, trust funds, medals, they all look powerful from a distance, but in the end, documentation decides everything. Facts outlast feelings. Timestamps outlast speeches. And leadership isn't about who tells the story best. It's about who carried the responsibility when it counted. If you've ever watched someone take credit for your work, your sacrifice, or your pain, you already understand the weight of staying quiet. Family revenge stories aren't always about payback. Sometimes they're about alignment. Sometimes they're about stepping forward calmly and letting the truth speak where you don't have to. In the military, integrity is the only thing you truly own. And once that's secure, the rest becomes noise. If stories like this real-world military conflicts, family revenge stories, and the quiet kind of accountability that actually changes outcomes matter to you, subscribe to the channel. There's more coming.